Julia, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'd like to say good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to the directors of OFC for giving me the opportunity to come here today to talk about the NFU's priorities on international trade and how trade policy decisions will impact farming's resilience. I wanted to reflect on some advice that Jude gave us first thing this morning about thinking about whose shoulders we have stood on to get us to where we are. And my dad's advice to me last night when I spoke to him, when I told him I was going to be speaking again today, he said, well, whatever you do, make sure you speak slowly and clearly, make sure people can understand your accent. So I shall draw on that inspiration, and wise words, Jude, certainly. Before we get into the panel discussion, what I'm going to do is set the scene on the three big trade themes that will be shaping UK agriculture. The forthcoming EU reset, the evolving situation with the US and the trade relationship with the USA, and then finally touch on the other global opportunities and challenges for British farming. But before I do that, I would like to just take a moment to set the scene. The UK is, and always has been, a trading nation. But what we have seen in recent years, and hopefully you can see that from the picture, don't worry too much about the numbers, is what we are seeing is our imports growing rapidly in recent years in value and our exports lagging behind. And what that means is that our deficit, the growing deficit, has never been wider than it ever has. If we set Scotch whisky aside, and I'm sure Emily Rhodes will touch on and champion Scotch whisky, but if we set that aside, if we think about the agri-food performance, our agri-food deficit is now running at around £3.5 billion a month as a country. That, to me, represents untapped potential for our farmers to grow the value and the volume of UK exports and to displace some of those imports with the high-quality, homegrown, value-added products that we know that UK consumers want. And that will deliver jobs, growth, resilience across the UK and return value back to our farmers. And again, just drawing on the themes of the conference, everybody in this room has a role to play in turning that deficit into an opportunity for our agri-food supply chain. The EU remains by far the UK's most important agri-food trading partner, accounting for around 70% of both our imports and our exports. But since 2019, and I use 2019 as a reference point, it was almost the last year of normal, before Brexit, before COVID, before the war in Ukraine, before the unprecedented inflation that we have seen. What we have seen is that imports have grown significantly, but our exports to the EU have largely stagnated. And that is why the NFU welcomed the government's intention to pursue a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement with the EU, an SPS agreement, to remove those barriers to trade and try and unlock growth. So what I'm going to do today is set out the NFU's priorities in terms of the EU reset negotiations. I'm going to focus on three areas: impact, implementation, and influence. And that is to ensure that we work on behalf of our members to get the best deal that we can through these negotiations. So if we start with impact, why are we doing it? Well, why is the government doing it? Sorry. There is the potential that this will unlock potential growth opportunities for us. It will reduce frictions and costs at the border. Since 2019, we have seen the volume of key exports reduced significantly. If we look at beef, it's almost down a quarter since 2019, lamb down nearly 15%, poultry, dairy, all down. We believe that a common SPS area could help to address the costs, the red tape, the bureaucracy, the risks of doing trade with our near neighbours in the European Union. It will also improve the operation of the Irish Sea arrangements and benefit the UK as a whole, and it will help to restore those lost flows of trade. It will also help, we believe, to unlock trade that we've lost. We've seen a ban on our seed potatoes, our high-value breeding stock, for example, and for our horticulture growers who face the added risk and jeopardy of those checks at the UK border when they are bringing in key inputs to their businesses. Hopefully that will all be removed by the successful conclusion of an SPS agreement. But all of those benefits do come with trade-offs. Back in May, the government agreed with the EU that the basis for this SPS agreement would be dynamic alignment. And what that means, essentially, is that the UK will adopt the EU rules in specific areas, including, for example, food and feed safety, plant health, animal health, general consumer protection rules, and organics. What remains unclear is how far alignment is going to go. We don't yet know whether it's going to include other areas, for example, animal welfare rules, but it's certainly going to be quite a significant change in terms of our rule making. How we go about implementing dynamic alignment is going to be really important for our farmers. Just before Christmas, the government said, alongside the EU, that it would like to secure an agreement by the end of the summer, really. They've said ahead of the next EU-UK summit. We don't have a date for that yet, but we do think that's going to be the first half of 2026. We're seeing media reports in the last few days about the parliamentary process that will be necessary in Westminster. There will be action required across the devolved governments. There will be action required in terms of the European Union itself and the European Parliament. But what people are saying is that they think that this parliamentary process could well be done by the end of 2026. And some people are even suggesting that there could be ready for an implementation in 2027, with some people suggesting that it could be a hard stop, basically a switching on the new rules at some point in 2027. How we go about implementing that is really important to UK farmers. In terms of dynamic alignment, yes, largely we have continued to follow the same rules, essentially the same outcomes as the European Union on food safety and agricultural practices, but there has been divergence. There's been divergence in key areas like plant protection products, on organics, on animal and plant health, and as we've already heard this morning, in key areas of innovation like the Precision Breeding Act. So we at the NFU are very much calling for a pragmatic approach to this implementation. There will be some sectors, like our horticulture sector, who will be raring to go to get the changes implemented as soon as they can to see those checks at the border removed. There'll be others where people are already growing plants in the ground, crops in the ground that will have been grown using plant protection products that potentially could be banned as a result of this dynamic alignment. We need to work through all of those challenges in terms of where we've seen divergence and come up with solutions that work so that the implementation of this can be as pragmatic and as proportionate and sensible as possible. And finally, in terms of the EU, the third priority for us is around influence. The dynamic bit of the dynamic alignment is important because the EU rules never stand still. So going forward, and even today, how do we ensure that British farmers' voice is heard in Brussels? We have our office over in Brussels, of course, which we will continue to use to ensure that UK farmers' voices are heard over there. But as a nation, the UK, we need to be having a meaningful role in terms of shaping those rules that are going to be impacting farmers. So we want to ensure that we have that meaningful rule shaper role going forward. Moving on really quickly to the situation with the US. Beyond the EU, the US is our second largest agri-food market, and UK farmers are certainly very proud to supply the US with high-quality British meats, dairy, and other products to the US. Just last week, there was a really important milestone when the UK team over in Washington, and big shout out to our ag attaché team over in Washington, worked with the US administration to get access to that 13,000 tonnes of beef that we'd been promised earlier this year. We got that on the final day of the year. Timing really mattered, because if we hadn't, we would probably be in the same situation as we saw last year, where the likes of Brazil would be able to fill that quota really, really quickly and crowd the UK out. So really great news that we did manage to get that quota sorted out by the end of the year. And that would be worth, we estimate, between £60 to £100 million for British beef farmers. So it's really a positive result. However, uncertainty does remain. I'm sure we'll hear that through the panel. President Trump's policy on tariffs continues to be a risk. It is clear that the UK is continuing to negotiate to try to secure a better outcome with the US, and the UK farmers are clear that agriculture must not be used as a bargaining chip to secure further relief and tariff changes for sectors outside of agriculture, whether that's steel, cars, pharmaceutical. We have no more to give. We have to be very firm in our view that we must not undermine our standards. We must not ensure that product that's produced to very different regulatory standards in a very different operating environment doesn't get access to the UK market. And then just finally, because I'm very conscious that I'm now out of time, in terms of the rest of the world, the previous government had a really ambitious trade agenda. The new government continues at that with deals secured with India and South Korea. There are a number that are still underway. The Gulf Cooperation Council should present a lot of opportunities for our exporters. Switzerland, a nation with many shared values to those that we have here in the UK, Turkey, and of course the talks with the US and Canada, US and the EU continue. And then there is, of course, Canada and Mexico waiting in the wings. So from an international trade agenda perspective, things are going to continue at a pace in the year ahead. Thank you.